Intermediate Apex development. So once you've learned the basics of code, you learn how to write syntax in Apex, you've learned how to make sure your code compiles, you've learned that you shouldn't put code in loops. Um, you've learned the basics of the language, kind of like if you were learning English and you learn how to spell, you learn how to write sentences, but at some point you need to learn how to communicate. And so most of the tutorials that you've gone through up until this point have to do with teaching you the fundamentals of writing code. And they're really good. You have to go through those. You know, Trailhead is a really great resource, and so are a lot of the courses that you find out in the community to begin to learn how to write Apex. But in a way, they can get you started, but they can't get you ready for the professional world, for the world that you will really encounter when it comes to do your job, because the complexity is so much higher in a real code base, and your job changes a little bit from becoming the one who creates something new to someone who's supporting something that already exists and or working in new changes to an existing code base. And so it's very difficult to practice the actual skills you need to be successful as a Salesforce developer until now. So now I've created this thing called the Apex Wilderness. And the Apex Wilderness is a package that we can install into a developer org. And what it does, it gives us a more realistic starting code base. This is the kind of code you will encounter as a Salesforce developer, even if it is a little bit simple in the beginning. But that's okay. You know, we'll have to work our way into it, and we need to learn how to manage this kind of code. So to get started, what we'll do is so if you go to the GitHub page, I'll have this link here. This is the AWA level 0. So this is a code base that is not very managing complexity very well. It does a certain number of things. It does them it's kind of like this code was written in the first draft. You know, that's a good way to think about the code that you'll produce in the beginning and even in the intermediate, is that in the beginning, you just know how to make it work. And it can be hard enough just to get the code to do what you want it to do. However, it's kind of like a sentence you speak in English. If you can master the concept, you can say it in a few words. But if it's a difficult concept in your mind, then you may have to struggle to kind of piece together all your points. And that can be very difficult for other people to follow, or even for your own self to follow. So let's go ahead and install this code base, and it'll make a little bit more sense after we've done that. So I have a developer org. If you don't have a developer org, it's pretty easy. I think that you should know how to do that if you're at this level. So what we're going to do is we're going to install this this package into our org. And I do it like this because I'm tricky. I think you should probably know how to install packages. So if you have any trouble with it, let me know and I can go over this. But I think most of you are familiar. So we have the Apex Wilderness Adventures, and we're going to install this. You can do it for all users or admins. It doesn't matter because it's just your dev org. Wait a little bit for that to install. Let's take a look at what we're going to get ourselves into. So this is the package, and what it's going to be mostly what we're looking to manage is triggers and related trigger code, because this is really the source of a lot of problems in Salesforce orgs, is that the design and the implementation of the triggers becomes very complex and complicated over time. Some things are naturally inherently complex, and some things grow in complexity and then they become complicated. So I make a distinction between complexity and complication in my mind. Complication is when you don't really understand something that's complex. Complex is just how it is sometimes. All right, installation complete. So now what we're going to do is we can verify that our package has been installed, and then we're going to pull down that into our IDE. So I've already made a connection. I like to use WebStorm with Illuminated Cloud plugin, but I think most developers out there are using VS Code, and that's fine. You can use VS Code. I think you probably know how to use it already. So what you'll do is after it's installed, now we need to pull down that classes. So we'll retrieve our metadata, update my connection. Let's see if we need to do this. Okay, so to become aware of which files I want to pull down, I'm going to open up, let's see, I'll show you from the UI, Illuminated Cloud, and then I'm going to configure the project. So I can configure the project, configure the module. We'll get there eventually. Cool. Now I can say what I want to pull in. So I don't want everything right now. If it's a new dev org, you probably won't have to worry and you can just pull it all in. I'm going to choose all the things that are related to this. Not that. Park of interest, park tour, temp lead. There we go. And then lastly, we'll pull in our triggers, which is going to be adventure park, lead trigger, park of interest, park tour, and temp lead. And hopefully that's everything. Okay, so now when I go to retrieve it, this will actually show up this time. Hopefully. There we go. Okay, so now we can see that these are all red, which means they're just on our server. So I'll retrieve those now. And those will populate here in the Force app. Alrighty, there we go. All right, so we are now ready to set up. So before we wrap this video up and go on to where we start digging into this code base to learn some of the intermediate skills for maintenance, let's go ahead and just see what we're getting ourselves into. Oh, we need one more. It looks like I need to get the service appointment handler as well. So let's do that. There we go. Retrieve. And now we just want server only. Go. There we go. That looks better. Okay, so this is kind of what you're going to see in, this is still pretty friendly, even though it doesn't look very friendly. This is, this isn't the kind of trigger that you're going to write when you're going through a course, but this is what you're going to see. And in this trigger, we see a couple of interesting things. There's two different handlers. That seems kind of weird to me because why would there be distinctive handlers? Do we actually need those? Is that part of the design? So that's a big question we're going to be asking ourselves over and over. Are these things part of the design or are they not part of the design? Because what happens in code is that you're always going to begin with the most perfect architecture. And then over time, in pressure from job, from emergencies, from late missed requirements. All these things are going to push you to develop uh, and undermine the design. And with a lot of small choices where you slowly undermine the design of the code base, you eventually cause your architecture to decay. So it's an interesting thing because code itself, if you think about what kind of a building material it doesn't fatigue, it doesn't weather away. It's not like a normal physical entity that's going to, be subject to entropy. But our code bases are still subject to entropy, not because the code runs and it, slowly wears out, but because we make changes to the code that undermine the intention of the design or the conventions. And so the code becomes more and more difficult to change over time. But the cool thing about code is that we can reverse entropy. We can make code that has degraded and become poorly designed, poorly implemented, or complicated into something that is refined, like restored. So we're going to be restoring our code base back to its best state. And then in the process of doing that, we're going to learn more and more about what the code actually does. We'll have opportunities to document it, opportunities to find needles in the haystack of these little problems that go wrong. And then we can find, oh, that's why this thing keeps happening. So this is kind of what we're going to be looking for. Let's go ahead and look at the lead trigger. So it's a little bit different, but kind of the same. It's wrapped in a is running. This one isn't wrapped in is running. It has instantiated lead trigger handler. This uses static properties. Those things aren't a big deal, but it's kind of one of those things where you want consistency in your design, even sometimes whenever, well, there's a fine line between overly dogmatic about design and being consistent with design. And so we're going to find how to balance those things. And then we have our park of interest. We have a park tour. And then finally, we have our temp lead. And you can see that this one's gotten really messy. Like in terms of bad code or code that I would consider not clean, like if we're talking about clean code versus code that's not so clean, this is more problematic because this has truly violated a core principle that almost every Apex developer knows, is that you don't write code in your trigger. Your trigger should just be about understanding the context of the save operation and then passing that off to a handler. But this one actually has logic. And if there was more logic, it would be even worse. There isn't too much, but you will definitely come across triggers in your real world that you're going to find this kind of stuff. So we're going to learn how to deal with this. It's not so hard, actually. We can manage all this. All right, so those are the triggers. Let's look through some classes. So we have our handler for the adventure park. And so, this is kind of a similar thing. Like we have a helper, right? But the helper and the handler does work too. So, is the handler doing too much work? Should it be passing it off to the helper? Probably. It's hard to say right now, but I'd imagine so, because we want separation of concerns. That's the whole concept behind having a trigger, is that the separation of concerns tells us that this class or this method should do one thing, it should do it really well, and it shouldn't do anything else. Because the more and more it does, the more burdens it gets, and it gets harder and harder to maintain that code over time. So we're going to be looking for this, and as we work on rectifying this code, we will maybe move logic around quite a bit. Let's look at the helper. So the helper is really simple, right? This helper has one method, but the handler is doing all kinds of stuff. So this is a really good opportunity to see how this design has eroded. And then we have a test. So our tests are going to be very important to us. And this is going to be a starting point for a lot of our work, is fixing the test first. It's kind of test-driven development, kind of not, because this is existing code. But by focusing on the tests, we can create our best guess or our best capability of creating a test harness, understanding what the code is supposed to do. And you're going to find the worst code in all of Apex inside tests. So sometimes you just have to just say, who cares about this test? Maybe take some good from it, learn a little bit, or just leave it behind. It just depends because, you know, it's one of those things where because it's compulsory, where we have to have 75% code coverage, a lot of organizations don't care. All their goal is just to meet that criteria, but they don't understand how important tests are or what value they actually provide. So we're going to learn that as well. And I think that it's kind of the same. You know, some of these are pretty long, some of them are kind of short. The trigger helper for lead is pretty long because lead tends to get big. If you have opportunity, it's probably pretty big too. And then some of the other ones that are custom objects, they're probably going to be a little bit smaller, but some of them are big too. Like this one's fairly large. So it's really dependent upon the organization. And if we look at some of these code structures, we can kind of see this complexity. And how do we see it? We see it in terms of nesting and dead code, as well as these violations to the right margin. Like you can't read this code. This code's very difficult to read, not because we don't understand Apex, but because it's all jammed together. I mean, you can't even see this in one look. You have to scroll and scroll, and that's not the worst ones I've seen. It's not the worst ones you will see. You'll have this kind of code that gets, you know, this seemed easy for whoever it was that was developing at the time, or they were under pressure, or they were just doing their best to get it this far. And the great thing to remember about even dirty code is that if it's working, it's doing its job. We want to make it even better. And it has a lot of extra value that's presented when you do make it better. So we're going to look for nesting too. You know, when we have these for loops, like this is crazy. For if, that's insane. You don't want this level of nesting in your code. And this isn't that bad. This is even worse, right? If, for, if, you know, like what you would need to do to test this code properly is a lot higher than it should be. And it has to do with understanding data structures and simplifying logic. So all this stuff is things that we're going to learn how to fix. And this is really important because if you don't fix this kind of code, but you figure out how to understand it by taking notes or on a whiteboard or conversations, and this still exists, then even if you solve today's problem, in a year you're going to confront this code again, and then you're going to be back to square one, and hopefully you remember a little bit of what you painfully in time consuming came to understand. But we can fix this kind of code so that it's obvious what it does. There's no ambiguity about it. We can look at some of these names, and some of the names are okay. We could say delete POI under contact. That's not too bad. Delete POI from lead, that's pretty good. So we'll be looking at these names to say, does this name say what the method does, or is it really ambiguous or generic? So naming is going to be another really important thing. And then we have a few more. That's kind of more the same. So what we're going to do is we're going to slowly and incrementally work our way through this code base, making changes to improve the design, to improve the testing, and eventually make it to where it's easy to understand and communicate what this code does. So hopefully you've gotten this far. In the next video, we'll go through one of the triggers. We'll start with Adventure Park, and we'll begin restoring our code base. See you then.